Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the South Asia Center of the Atlantic Council and the American Pakistan Foundation, I'm Shuja Nawaz, and I welcome you to this special conversation with author Mohsin Zaidi. As we all know, racial, ethnic, and religious discrimination are persistent challenges that many immigrants from Pakistan and South Asia face when they move to the West. Though such discrimination is often seen within their homelands too. A unique challenge confronts the younger generation in the West, whose immigrant families are often shackled by the rigid dogmas of the countries of their origin. Mohsin Zaidi's personal story is captured in an uplifting and riveting book, A Dutiful Son, a memoir of a gay Muslim's journey to acceptance. It encapsulates the experience of many South Asian immigrants who struggle to be accepted by a rigid host society as well as an obscurantist family heritage. Its new edition, that is now available in the United States, has a more pointed subtitle, A Memoir of Secrets, Lies, and Family Love. Zaidi successfully fought against the odds, making it from a disadvantaged Pakistani Muslim community in East London to Keble College at the University of Oxford. Oxford itself presented a new world of challenges of race and class. And back at home, a witch doctor was invited by his father to quote unquote cure him, and confronting him with a difficult choice. Mohsin's sheer determination and bravery helped him to find himself and the freedom to become his own man. Mohsin has worked at the UN War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague and at the UK Supreme Court. After having become a lawyer at a leading firm in Britain, he shifted gears and took up legal aid practice to assist other disadvantaged members of British society. Today, he's an advocate for LGBT rights, BAME, which is the Black Asian Minority Ethnic Representation and Social Mobility, and he's on the board of Stonewall, the UK's biggest LGBT rights charity, and is a governor of his former secondary school. Thank you, Mohsin Zaidi, for joining us, and thank you everyone who is joining us from Pakistan and other parts of the world, as well as the United States, to mark the release of the US edition of Zaidi's book and to discuss the issues that he faced, as well as those faced by many younger immigrants and their families today, issues that are often not discussed openly or widely in many immigrant communities, especially from Pakistan and the Muslim world. Also participating in the discussion will be Senior Foreign Affairs Reporter for the HuffPost, Akbar Shahid Ahmed, and Co-Chair and President of Muslims for Progressive Values, Malia Khan. Welcome to both of them. This book release comes during Pride Month in the United States and around the world, a time of commemoration of the June 1969 Stonewall riots and the continued struggle for freedom of sexuality and gender identity around the world. Mohsin is joining us today from London. I welcome our audience to enter our discussion with our other two guests, and their comments and questions will be captured by my colleagues at the Atlantic Council, and I shall attempt to get as many as we can into this conversation. On to Mohsin. Well, welcome again, Mohsin. And I wanted to ask you, your book is more than a personal account of the multiple conflicts that you faced as a Muslim in Britain. It raises many intersectional issues related to being a Muslim, being of Pakistani origin, and belonging to an economically disadvantaged immigrant group. It mirrors the wider struggle of immigrant populations in Western societies. And it covers the issue of sexual identity, which is almost never discussed openly in Muslim societies at home or in the diaspora. What made you decide to share your story? And briefly, what were the challenges you faced as a Pakistani raised in Britain?
Well, first of all, can I just say thank you so much for having me on to speak. Some of your previous guests have been huge, so I was chuffed to be asked. Thank you. And I've just realised chuffed is a very British word, but it just means very excited. So turning to your first question, why did I write the book? There are a whole host of reasons. I guess the easiest thing to do is to say that when I was about 13 years old, I remember being in London and watching TV, and there was a young actor on screen, and he was talking about a new TV show that he was in. And he was very handsome. And I remember driving past this billboard, and I saw this actor's face again, and next to it were the words "Queer as Folk," Channel 4, 10 p.m. And it got to that evening, that Tuesday, when they were going to be airing that show. And I didn't know why, because I didn't know what the word gay was, but I remember I knew I needed to watch. And I have this distinct memory, and I write about creeping down the stairs when my parents were asleep, or I thought they were asleep upstairs, and holding the remote control really tightly and turning on the TV. And on it, I saw this show with two men kissing, and something inside of me, it was like I just discovered this new box of feelings that had thus far been hidden somewhere. And it was really exciting for the briefest of moments. And then it was petrifying. And it made me feel so alone and scared, because suddenly I realized that there was something that made me completely different to my family and put me on the outside of them. And it was a secret, and I knew I had to harbor this secret. And the thing about this TV show is that it helped me see something that I hadn't seen before, but it also helped me feel just that little bit less alone. And one of the reasons for writing the book, the dedication in the book reads in part, "To young people struggling with their identity, you are not alone." And that was one of the reasons. It was because I really wanted to try and make people like me understand that they aren't alone. And I guess the other reason for writing it was around shame. I think shame is a really powerful concept, particularly within our community. And I was tired of being ashamed, because I didn't choose to be this way. And if you read the book, you'll see how hard I tried not to be this way. But ultimately, there was no choice in the matter. And I came to the conclusion that I had nothing to be ashamed of. And so one of the reasons for writing it was also that. It was the idea of taking control of this narrative that is my existence, so that it couldn't be used against me anymore.
Thank you. Mohsin, you talk a lot in the book about the whole process of coming out to your family, and how difficult that was, and how, particularly in a very religious family, where you belong to the Shia sect, and you felt you were outsiders from mainstream Islam because of Islam's various divisions that tend to divide and subdivide the Islamic community, the Muslim community. And you talk about your trips with the family to Syria, for instance, to a shrine, and you talk about praying for help in dealing with these feelings that you talked about. Describe a little more that process of getting to deal with your family, and where did you get the support from?
Well, I think I said in the previous answer is I tried really hard not to be gay, because I thought that I was, at some point I thought I was possessed. And so I talked to somebody about an exorcism. And then I remember going on pilgrimage to Syria, to Damascus, 3 different times at different points in my teenage years. And each time, I remember my parents would always say, if you ask for it, God will give it to you. And so I asked to be cured, because I knew from a very young age. And so all I ever asked for was to be cured. In fact, one of the working titles for the book was 11,000 prayers, because I calculated that if you pray 5 times a day between the age of 13 and 19, for the same thing, it's about 11,000 times that I would have prayed to be cured. And in terms of support, honestly, until I got to university, and finally, not even in the first year, in the second year of university, when I finally realized that I had to tell somebody, I didn't feel very much support at all, because I felt trapped. if I told anybody, it made it true. And by not telling anybody, I could live in hope that something would change. So for example, when I got into Oxford, because it was so unlikely at the time for that to have happened, I remember going straight to the Jannamas and asking for God to take it away and praying for one miracle to be taken away in exchange for another. So this miracle of Oxford being taken away in exchange for me being cured. And so unfortunately, I didn't have very much support because I wasn't told, you know, again, we talked earlier about why I wrote the book, but the book was about hoping that somebody like me back then wouldn't feel so alone. But so the support came later.
Now, when you talk about Oxford, you raise the issue of acceptance, and actually the word acceptance in your first subtitle of the book deals probably with both communities, your own community as well as the host community. But at Oxford, you talk about the issue of race and almost the caste or class system that inhabits British society.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about the difficulty on two fronts that you had to face?
Yeah, so I mean, I remember like the first week I went into so every Oxford college has a bar. It's the kind of hub of its community, alcohol being the center of English society. And I remember going into the college bar and there were these two guys and they were both arguing. And they'd gone to these schools called Eton and Harrow. Now, Eton is the place where the princes or the royal family go, and Harrow is another one. And I remember they were arguing about this, and they said, Mohsin, you can solve this for us. Which one's better, Eton or Harrow? And I remember saying to them, I've never heard of those schools. And they was really shocked. And they said, how have you never heard of our schools before? And my genuine reply was to say, well, have you heard of Walthamstow High School? And they said, no. I said, well, why would I have heard of your schools? Now, it sounds like a really clever retort, but in fact, it was ignorance, because I did not appreciate my place in society, and British society in particular is very class-based. And I didn't appreciate how low down I really was. And I remember changing the subject and saying, oh, well, when does our student loan come in? Because I'm going to need money soon. And they both said, we don't have student loans. And I said, where do you get money from? To which the reply was, our parents give us money. And without thinking, my question then was immediately, what, so your parents just have thousands of pounds in a bank account that they can just give you? And in their faces, I knew that I had offended English sensibility. I'd offended the idea that we don't talk about money. And they said yes, but then I went away. I remember calling my mum and saying, Mum, there are some really rich people here. Like, I knew that there was Bill Gates. I knew there was that level of wealth. But as I said earlier, I didn't know that there was this class system, and I didn't know my place within it. And so that's something that I learned as I spent more time at university.
And that's part of the struggle for most immigrant communities in Britain as well as in the United States, that they have to become accepted. And in order to be accepted, they have to fight against these barriers that exist. Now, in Britain these days, there's been a fair amount of turmoil surrounding racial and religious identity. Even the traditionally employed acronym BAME, that stands for Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic, now seems to be under some debate as to whether it's appropriate any longer. Is this debate and this dialogue confined to the immigrant community, or do you think that the dominant Caucasian host community is also rethinking its position on these issues?
I think that we have seen a sea change since the murder of George Floyd. I think that although that happened in America, so much of what happens in America has a knock-on effect on the rest of the world. And in Britain, we've definitely felt that. I do think that it does mean that there are conversations happening, not just within immigrant populations or ethnic minority diaspora. I guess for me, when it comes to things like taking issue with the word BAME, for me, that's a very complicated situation, because in America, I don't think you have a large South Asian population, or at least relative to the Black population. Whereas in Britain, the picture is very different. In Britain, South Asians are the largest minority by some way. We make up 7.3% of the British population. The Black population is 3.3%. So we're kind of more than double. And what's happened now is we've had the Black Lives Matter movement, which has gone global, and I think that's fantastic. And as a result, people are attacking the word BAME because they're saying, well, actually, you know, we are all different. We shouldn't be lumped together. And that's absolutely fine. But I think that the problem for the South Asian diaspora is how do we make sure that our voices, particularly in the UK, are being heard when our stories are not at the forefront in America? Because we're not more prominent there, because we just don't make up the numbers there. The other thing I would say is, as a lawyer, I understand the importance of semantics, but I must say that I don't think that every conversation around race is born equal. And what I mean by that is that although terminology is important to me, it's not as important to me as the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to economic opportunity. So I think that one of the problems is sometimes we get really caught up on these culture wars, and for example, whether we rip down a certain statue or not. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have that debate. I welcome that debate. But what I find frustrating is when the national headlines or the international headlines are concerned more with statues than they are with the fact that 50% of all children in prison in the UK are Black or brown or ethnic minorities. And so when you ask me about are the Western, the white population concerned with this? Yes, they are concerned with it, but I think the problem is they're becoming concerned and over preoccupied with the wrong thing. Because the things we should be talking about are, why are Black women 4 times more likely to die in childbirth in Britain? Sorry, I'm using British statistics, so I'm from here. Why are they more likely to die? Why are Asian men the most likely to receive the longest custodial sentences in prison? Why are Black and brown people in Britain disproportionately more likely to be poor? Those are the things that I think we should be concerning ourselves with, not this debate around statues and whether we should be using the term BAME. Now, I'm not saying that those aren't valid arguments to have, but there seems to be a deficit in terms of the priorities that we're diverting our energy towards.
And those numbers that you cite for Britain are mirrored in American society too, and these are issues that are now coming to the forefront. Thank you, Mohsin. As we look at the immigrant communities, particularly, and how they engage with their host societies, an important element is the need to clarify for themselves what they stand for. Now, that's a debate and a discussion that quite often is not taking place. Now, here we have a group called Muslims for Progressive Values, and it's one of the organizations in the United States that serves as a forum for resolving such issues. And I welcome its co-chair and president of the District of Columbia chapter, Malia Khan. She's also originally from Pakistan. So Malia, you've heard what Mohsin has said about Britain. You've also read a lot about him in his book. Can you compare and contrast the issues facing Muslims in Britain with those facing American Muslims? How is Muslim society in America dealing with these issues, particularly of becoming Americans while retaining their religious and cultural identity?
Certainly, yeah. Thank you so much for having me. And I echo pretty much everything Mohsin has said, and a lot of it does apply to the United States. Certain elements are different, as he has noted. We have our own class issues here, maybe not quite as rigid as the UK does, but our own class systems, I guess you can say. But to your specific question about how the Muslim community, or specifically the South Asian community, is handling, kind of assimilation and crafting their own identity also in this country, there's a long way to go, I'll say. I know, being a first generation Pakistani, you're kind of straddling both worlds, and, one step in your parents' culture, your homeland, and then one step in American culture. So, that comes with a tremendous number of challenges. And I think what helps is breaking down what elements of those are values, particularly a lot of us, take religious values, and then separating them from cultural practices. And so one of the reasons why I joined Muslims for Progressive Values was because I found that like-minded group that really focused on values versus just kind of dogma and practices, and helped me craft my personal identity. And I think it's done that similarly for a broad range of Muslims in America. And there are, similar groups all around the world. I think more and more people are finding that the ethnic bubbles that they had been raised in, as I was, within the South Asian community. I grew up in New York City, so just Queens, very Sunni, very Pakistani. That was my circle, and I think more and more people are reaching out to broader, more diverse groups because they're finding that what they've been raised with within those ethnic bubbles doesn't quite help them assimilate maybe as well as they could into American culture. And people don't often, and sometimes there's negative connotations to assimilation, I understand that, but there's a reason, obviously, that our parents and grandparents moved to these countries, and we should be open to adapting certain values. And so, sorry, I don't know if I'm going off track, but we'll circle back to other elements of your question.
Well, now that we have Mohsin available to us with his knowledge and experience of across the pond, is there any question that you would like to ask him that would benefit you and your organization, as well as other Pakistani Americans and Muslim Americans?
Certainly, yeah. Mohsin, you mentioned, not having a lot of support in university, but I'm curious as to who were the people, the individuals, or the groups you found inspiration with or guidance from later in life, and how that helped you kind of craft your identity, or at least become more accepting of it.
Yeah, so I guess when I was at university, I ended up seeing a counselor. So I had help because I was unraveling. As a person, I was far away from home, British far away, not American far away. You guys have got you'll drive for miles and think it's like around the corner, but I was far away from home, and I think suddenly I had this vantage point of I'm no longer close to my family, and I'm expected to be an individual. I'm not expected to be one unit in this community, and that was very confronting. And then, as I've talked earlier, I was also thinking about class, but then also, for the first time in my life, I found myself to be the only non-white person in a room, and that had never happened to me in London. And so I think the support that I ended up getting once I finally came out was through a counsellor who became invaluable, and then obviously with close friends. But later in life, I came across, so we have an initiative here called the Inclusive Mosque Initiative, which is set up, I guess it's similar to your organization, and it's set up to try and explore the renewal of Islam and values that it teaches. Then the other organization that really, I guess, helped me find a space was an organization called UK Black Pride, which is like a pride organization for ethnic minorities in Britain. And I remember going along to one of their events, and there was nothing different about me, really, for the first time, because everybody was kind of in the same boat. And it was remarkable, because there are very few places, when you're a minority growing up in a majority white country, there are very few spaces you can go to where there isn't a part of you that is thinking about how you stick out, or you are different, or having to be confronted in some way by it. And so it's organizations like that that really helped me find a sense of myself.
Thank you, Mohsin. I guess in the US, in universities particularly, there is a proliferation of Muslim student associations, and they sort of serve often as a first point of call for students, particularly from overseas, when they're lost in this vast new world that they've inhabited. Let me turn next to Akbar Shahid Ahmed. He's a journalist from the HuffPost, which was previously better known as the Huffington Post. I've been privileged to follow Akbar's writings and very fine reporting on a host of issues ever since he moved from Yale to Washington, D.C. some years ago. So Akbar, let me ask you, as a gay Muslim yourself, how do you relate to the issues that Mohsin faced in Britain?
Thank you, Shuja, for that very kind introduction. Mohsin, I think your book was remarkable in kind of locating power and agency in this fight for love and acceptance. So I think there's just it's really easy to have narratives of scapegoating or despair or blame. And this is not a story of that. And I hope that folks who do get a chance to read it understand that. I think particularly for queer Muslims, particularly in a diaspora that's spread across Western democracies, but also like the Gulf, extremely restricting Muslim societies, and then obviously the Muslim heartland, it's really important to see this as universal. And I think what the book does effectively there is showing discrimination is not just about Muslim families, right? So Mohsin talks about the London gay scene where it's like no Pakis, which is a very familiar thing in the US. I'm sure it's familiar in like Canada and Europe, wherever. And it's also this kind of history, right? Of discrimination is not about just brown faces or the Muslim faith. You think about Section 377, which outlawed sodomy in India and therefore Pakistan. That I thought was really powerful. And then I also thought the fact that it's just really challenging, right? There's not a straightforward moment of triumph. I think about your moment, Mohsin, of introducing your fiance, or now fiance, right, to your mother, and that the challenge of that and saying, okay, I'll take Matthew and I'll have this moment. The moment doesn't come. It is this kind of lifelong journey. I think that'll resonate with a lot of queer folks who are forging their own paths, finding partners, having these conversations, but realizing I had it at 22, I'm going to have it again at 25, I'm going to have it again at 35. And I do wonder, Mohsin, kind of in writing this and being out there, handling that nuance is really hard. Like I struggle with handling nuance in my own writing and reporting. So I'm wondering, going to publishers and then also just being in the media, right? So it's so easy to be instrumentalized. I'll never forget being based in the US, how Donald Trump stood up in 2016 and said, Saudi Arabia pushes gays off buildings, and said this as the presidential candidate of the party that is constantly trying to limit sexual freedom in the United States, right? So you're saying, I will be a protector of the LGBT community. So curious about the publishing industry and curious also about how you tackle being possibly instrumentalized or weaponized, right? You are the confirmation of biases against whether it's Muslims or brown people, that they're backwards and it's hard to be gay. So how do you kind of tackle that?
Well, it was, first of all, thank you for what you said about the book. That's really nice of you. I think that, so I don't think I am the confirmation, actually, because, and the reason I say that is because this isn't a book about rejection. And if it were a book about rejection, then I would agree with you. And I think that to the extent, I say this over and over again, to the extent there are any heroes in this book, they're actually my parents, because they find a way of loving me and accepting me and my fiance, my white Irish fiance, even though it's really hard. So I think that actually, you're completely right. The instrumentality of me is something I'm always mindful of, because I'm constantly asked. So for example, one of the questions I get asked a lot was, what was it like growing up in a homophobic family? And my response is, well, the book doesn't say that my family were homophobic. I grew up in the 80s where the AIDS crisis was raging, and the Tory British government introduced legislation to prevent the promotion of homosexuality in schools. So when you ask me that question, I have to remind you of the context that we all grew up in. And so it's, and you use the word nuance, and I think that's absolutely right. Nuance is this kind of ever-moving beast that you're trying to get hold of. And so when I'm answering questions, I'm always mindful of that, of acknowledging the fact that I did grow up in a culture where there just wasn't space for queerness, but reminding the interviewers of the background. So one of the reasons why I think that the story is powerful, I do say so myself, is because it bucks the trend. It's the opposite of, you know, when people look at the front cover, a lot of Muslims look at the front cover and they think, oh, here we go, some like Gora brown boy who has gone to Oxford, he's sold out, and now he's writing a book about how awful his family are. But that isn't this. So if you're a Muslim who reads the book, I think it's very difficult, and I intentionally did this, it's very difficult to find anything that you can hit Muslims over the head with this book. And I you know, I would challenge people to say, okay, show me the part that it could be weaponized. To your point about the publishing industry, it's interesting because when I remember I was talking to an editor and she said to me, this was not my editor, it was somebody else. She said, oh, really, this is 3 books. There's a book here about class, there's a book here about race, and there's a book here about sexual identity. And I think it might be too ambitious for you to try and put all of this in one book, but you can have a go if you want to. And I remember thinking, this is my life. So you're telling me that if I can reduce myself into these different parts, that yeah, you might be willing to publish it. But if I try and have a go at being myself, at being real, at being intersectional in the way that all of us are, then that's too complicated for the publishing industry. And I knew that was probably not the right person to work with.
I think you're right. Mohsin, life, as you say, is multi-layered and complicated, and it has to be treated in that way. You're also right in, since I've read and reread your book, that your family does come across as the sort of heroes of the story, because they mean so much to you, and it's the relationship between you and the family and the wider family, not just your immediate family, but your uncle particularly, that comes across, and that is really where family love triumphs. Let me bring Akbar back in, and at a different level, Akbar, you know, unlike me, I came here in 1972 and have more or less been in the US except for brief forays abroad, you know, have been in the US. On a broader level, how have you, as a younger Pakistani American, navigated the journey from identifying as a Pakistani to becoming a Pakistani American? And what are the challenges, the special challenges that the Pakistani American community faces in that journey?
I think it's as most was saying, you just can't separate from history and context. I moved to this country under Barack Obama, you know, was here through Khizr Khan at the DNC, kind of holding up his constitution, and obviously the Trump presidency and now Biden. And I will say I'm not a Pakistani American yet. If anyone does want to expedite my immigration processing, please feel free. But it's a constant challenge of not just crafting an internal identity, but kind of having to answer for it publicly, particularly if one is in the public space, right? So whether you're in politics or journalism or whatever you're doing, cultural stuff. And the only kind of way to navigate that, and this is where it's so valuable to have books like Mohsin's, is to be extremely public about your values and what you stand for and what, you know, who you want to be, which is hard, right? And can get you in trouble. I mean, you see people whose past writings or their past statements or family connections will become an issue. And I think the more Pakistani Americans are honest about who they are. I liked also in the book, and I have thought a lot about this and how to identify, use it now myself, saying the words gay Muslim, right? I think can be really hard. So, and I compare this often with like the American Jewish community. Like being culturally Jewish is a very understood thing. It's everywhere in society, and folks talk about that and craft that cultural narrative. Unfortunately, we haven't quite gotten to that point of like, I can identify as Muslim and so can you, and we can do it in very different ways. And I hope that, you know, we can get there. I think the Pakistani American community has a role to play there, but so many other Muslim communities do.
Thank you, Akbar. Mohsin, coming back to you, there's a much wider issue that is being debated in Britain, but also in America. And I refer to a new book by Ed Hussein that has just come out, and that was the subject of a column in The Economist on June the 5th, the budget column. The book is called Among the Mosques, which I think may be a riff on Naipaul's Among the Muslims, which he wrote many, many years ago. But in that, Bagehot discusses three paradoxes. And for those that may not have read that column, let me quickly summarize those. The first is the paradox of toleration. That's the limit to the extent that liberal societies can tolerate extreme views of immigrant population, such as stoning of gays or abuse of Muslim women who don't follow the hijab. Then there's the paradox of diversity. In other words, the liberal welfare state demands a common identity. You have to assimilate to be accepted. Hence, the support for provision of public goods fails and falls in the minds of the host majority if the recipients, read immigrants, are very different from the host society. And the third paradox is the battle for the soul of Islam. This is often brought up, and Bagehot claims that the state bends towards the clerics and the community leaders as the representatives of immigrant societies, and thus it tolerates or abets the forces of reaction rather than enlightenment within immigrant communities. So the internal battle within the Muslim society, within the diaspora, continues. The question is Bagehot right on these all three accounts? And this applies to both Britain as well as the US. Mohsin, your reaction, and then I'll ask Malia and Akbar to respond.
Well, I mean, I think you could spend at least an hour just talking about that answer there.
We may do that some other time. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. I'll volunteer myself for that debate. But I think, so first of all, I think that I don't think it's a battle. So, you know, the language that we use as if we all have to be internally fighting for the soul of Islam. I mean, there are 1.5 billion Muslims on the planet. Like, the idea that there is one soul or there is one right answer, I think is really problematic. When it comes to kind of liberal societies having to tolerate extreme views, again, I think one of the problems is the majority of Muslims do not belong in a camp that holds extreme views. There is a silent majority of Muslims that are getting on with their lives. They have food to put on the tables. They have jobs that they need to do. They're not concerned actually with my story. They're not concerned with this discussion. And they're not concerned with whether the Economist thinks they're extremists or not. They're not, because they're just normal people getting on with their lives. And I think one of the frustrations that I have is that I bet that book by Ed Hussein has got loads in it, but Bagehot has picked up on those things because those are the things that are headline grabbing. I'm not saying that they don't exist, but I think there is a real problem when a minority is used in order to extrapolate a generalization that can be applied to a whole group of people. There are, as I said at the beginning, there are 1.5 billion Muslims on the planet. And I don't know if this seems naive, but I just don't think that the majority of those people hold what you would describe as extremist views. So I don't share the concern, I must say. And then when it comes to the idea of the welfare state relying on a common identity, the fact of the matter is we do share a common identity. We, as I said earlier, most of us are working people trying to raise our children to be good and to have a decent voice in the world and protect them from harm. And that is common to everybody. And the problem is that we are constantly fed this notion that Muslims are somehow different, that Muslims are extreme, that Muslims do not want to be a part of us, when most of the time that's just not true. And so I guess I'm having quite a different reaction to the article than the kind of intellectual one, because I think that the premise upon which it is based is so skewed towards assumptions based on minority. And I just don't accept that.
Thank you. Valid points. Malia, do you agree with that, or do you have another view?
Do you know, can you go to Akbar? I'm just going to settle down my puppy real quick. I'll be right back. I didn't want to leave without just telling you why I was going to turn my camera off for a second.
Akbar, you get to go first.
Yeah, I think Mohsin, makes some really good points, not to hit The Economist. And I think, I'm reading a book right now that I really enjoy. It's called Destiny Disrupted. It's by a guy called Tamim Ansari, and it's a history of the world through Muslim eyes. And just the perspective shift of trying to look at the world from like the year 600 through Muslim empires and how they existed is so valuable in trying to address this question of what will Muslim communities do in any given context, right? So you can't essentialize. I think here in the book about sort of the Crusades coming in and disrupting religious diversity that existed in Muslim societies at the time, but not in Christian majority societies. So I do think we're having these kind of circular conversations that are a bit divorced from context. There's also a panic, right? A political and national panic that we've lived through. And as with any moral panic, you mentioned the AIDS crisis earlier, Mohsin, there's not a benefit to being spurred by fear or generalization.
Thank you. I don't know if Malia is back, but let me just say that I think this shifting of perspective that you talk about is really necessary, because many of us who grew up, say in Pakistan in the post-colonial period, learned even Indian history. There was no Islamic history. There was no history of Pakistan when I went to school. We had to learn from our teachers' notes just as we were finishing our O levels the last year when it became compulsory. So I think there's a need to get to know our own history and culture before we take on someone else's history or culture or their retelling of global history. But in the US, of course, in recent years, there's been an attempt to include world history and world culture in the curriculum. I see Malia is back, so maybe if she can address the same question.
Yeah, I'm not going to say too much more than what the guys have already said. I think I agree that it is a little sensationalist to go in that direction, but that's not to say, that there aren't still lots of room. There isn't a lot of room for improvement, and the community is still struggling to deal with a lot of issues. But we are a very, new minority within, at least within the United States, not so much with the UK. And I'm talking about the South Asian Muslim community. So, and there are issues that we share with other communities and other immigrant communities as well. And again, I don't think there's much more to say than there is a lot of work to do. And I do see a lot of progress being made generation to generation, which makes me very hopeful.
Thank you. I'd asked our audience to join us, and the questions have started coming in. Let me first move to Shariq Faruqi. Shariq Faruqi has actually been associated both with the America-Pakistan Foundation as well as the South Asia Center of the Atlantic Council. He is now in his final year of studies as an undergraduate at the George Washington University. So Shariq, if you're there, would you like to make a comment or ask a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank Mohsin so much for being brave and coming out and sharing this story and this book with us. I really appreciated the entire narrative as a queer Muslim, and just seeing the vulnerability as a Shia queer Muslim as well, and seeing that narrative where, you watched your father, do this very intimate act and share it with us and share it with the world, despite, judgments being made. And Mohsin, you've navigated class struggle, homophobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia, racism, mental illness. And a lot of it you've done on your own, unfortunately, because your support system wasn't there within university at Oxford. But now there is a different landscape for queer Muslims. Now there's social media, there are different platforms and pages, there's your book. There's a lot of queer journalists that are sharing their stories. And I just wanted to ask how you're navigating that, and how, you know, you hope other queer Muslims hope to navigate in this space now that that space has kind of changed and there are change makers like yourself. So how are you going to continue to, I guess, find light and build community within, you know, the South Asian Muslim community, within South Asian queer communities, but then also within other marginalized communities like the Black trans community, and a very disenfranchised community that, you know, shares a lot of solidarity with queer Muslims, and that we're all kind of on this journey to liberation. So I know that was very long-winded, but how are you, I guess, gonna navigate this new environment, or how have you already navigated it?
Well, I should say that I didn't travel alone. I think although the journey began as a very lonely one, I was very lucky to have found people along the way that helped me get to the point I'm at. So I couldn't have navigated any of the things that you listed by myself. I'm not going to lie, it's exhausting, and I kind of knew that it would be, and I think I'm really proud of the book and the work that the book is doing. But I feel like so the book, the paperback, the new cover, released in America, it came out a couple of weeks ago, and I'm really excited to be able to talk about it. But come July, when Pride Month is over and the paperback has been out for a month or so, I really hope that I can let the book just do its thing and go into the world and be the thing that I hope it can be to people. And although I'd love to write more, but I think I'd like to move away from writing about identity so on the nose anyway. And I think it's because, yeah, I'm kind of handing the baton over to your generation, right? Like, I think the thing for me was, when I was younger, I was just so frustrated because there was nobody. And I was just like, come on, there are so many of us, but we're all too scared to put our head above the parapet. And I totally get that. But if nobody does it, nobody's going to do it. And so I think now that I've kind of done it, I need a rest. And so I'm hoping that with all the things you said, there's the Instagram, which I find terrible and I'm really bad at using, but I try my best because my publisher and my agent tell me to. And with YouTube and with communities online, I really hope that the world will, that perhaps with the support of the book, that your generation will take things forward. I remain on the board of Stonewall, so I intend to continue to do my bit there. But I think if I could ask of one thing of people, that is that when they feel able, that they should tell their stories. And I'm not just talking about queer Muslims. In fact, I'm talking more about non-queer Muslims, because the problem is, as a queer Muslim, whenever I say to somebody, oh, we should deserve to be treated equally, all they hear is, I deserve to be treated equally, not we. And the power of having allies, heterosexual allies, is that they can have difficult conversations that we can't have, because whenever we say something, it's as if we have a gay agenda. And so the thing that I would love to see is the starting of maybe a Muslim ally network. In the book I write about setting up a support group for the families of queer Muslims. And I think, although, I don't have the time or the inclination, frankly, to set up a charity, and the charity that I took it to, they do their best, but they're understaffed. So what I would love is to have somebody pick that idea up and to run with that, because I think as queer Muslims, there is so much support now online, but for families, there's almost nothing. And so they're really isolated, they're really alone. And of course, when they're isolated and alone, what are they going to do but take out all of that frustration and that fear and that disappointment and that resentment on their child? Whereas if my dad had somebody to talk to, then maybe he wouldn't have called somebody to cure me. Because that other person, his friend, would have said, well, actually, I know somebody who's queer and it's fine. You don't need to, don't get a witch doctor around. That's ridiculous. So, yeah, it's not that I'm suddenly going to tap out, but I think that, what I would love to do is for other voices to be lifted up, and I would like to help do that.
Thank you, Mohsin. And thank you, Sharik, for your question and your comment. We've received a fair number of questions. I'm going to see if I can, in the remaining time, try and get a number of them out to Mohsin and to the panel. The first question is from someone who says, how do you feel about going back to Pakistan for a visit, knowing that this lifestyle is probably illegal in the country? And asking, because 2 of my children are gay and I would love to take them for a visit.
First of all, thank you for explaining why you asked the question, because that context has made me feel safer in answering it. And that's me just being honest with you about my reaction to being asked the question. And honestly, it's something I think about. And I don't know the answer. I'm not a Pakistani citizen, I'm a British citizen, I don't have a Pakistani passport. And I sometimes think, does that make me safer if I go to Pakistan? Because, you know, I'm not a dual national, which means the British government has a responsibility for me and they can't absolve themselves of that responsibility. But then I think, am I overthinking it? Am I worried about something that nobody really cares about? So I wish I could give you the answer. I think for now, I am unlikely to return to Pakistan anytime soon, but that's for lots of reasons, you know, COVID and, but I would hope to return. And I say return as if I was born there. I wasn't born there, but I would hope to go back because I feel a sense of responsibility to Pakistan. And I probably inherited that from my family. And I would love to do my part to try and support the country to be the strongest and best version of itself it can be.
Another question, what do you think are the most important things that fellow British and US citizens can do to support the Muslim community and to promote equality among people of differing ethnicities and sexualities?
Well, I think it's what I've said. It's when I speak about this, certain people don't hear because all they hear is the agenda. And I think that as much as possible, if straight Muslims can be allies, vocal allies, like get that, you know, have those conversations, make it clear that you're an ally. And I know that, you know, there's an argument that, well, we shouldn't have to do that. I'm not asking for you to do it performatively so that non-Muslims can see how liberal we are. I'm asking because I want there to be a chorus of voices, and I don't want all of those voices to be queer voices, because as I said earlier, it's tiring and it's personal. It's the same way, let me give you an example. I'm a feminist. I wasn't always a feminist. I learned what it means to be a person who fights for the equality of women. And I have been in situations in the legal profession in this country where I've been in groups of just men and people have made sexist jokes. And it's not been easy, but in that moment, I have said, I'm sorry, but you're being sexist and I can't abide that because I'm a brown person. And if you were being racist right now, I would expect whoever was standing here to say something. And that's the thing is, that's the sort of advocacy that we need. That's the sort of allyship that we need. Frankly, I don't really need anybody to read my book. I don't need you to be on this call. What I need you to do is when somebody's being homophobic in a scenario, I need you to say something. And that's all I'd ask for.
Thank you. Another question is a little more personal, Mohsin, for you, saying, how has your relationship with Allah evolved as you grew in your acceptance of your sexual identity?
Well, so I mean, one of the things I write about is how I think that we exist in a world where either you say God doesn't exist, so you're an atheist, or you say God does exist, or you say you don't know, so you're agnostic. And for the longest time, I have been none of these, and I mean that. I have been in a separate fourth category of I'm just not engaging with the question. And the reason that I was not engaging with the question was because I needed to be able to put it down. Because every time I engaged with the question, it overwhelmed me. And so by putting it down, I was able to live more peacefully. I have a lot of respect for my culture and for my faith, and my family who are practicing Muslims derive so much from it. And I miss prayer. I miss it. I totally understand why people pray 5 times a day. We have this modern invention called meditation and mindfulness, and all of that is, I mean, what better way than stopping 5 times a day to think and reflect? And so I miss it, and I can see myself returning to it. But I think that religion and faith is very personal and very private. And I don't that is something that sometimes people criticize in the book, and they say, well, this is unresolved. And that's, yes, it is. And there are two reasons for that. One is because it doesn't need to be resolved. And the other is because if it's resolved, then it's the only thing that people hear. If I suddenly get on my soapbox and talk about the religious angle and what the Quran says or doesn't say, then nobody listens to anything else that's in that book. And that book is more than just sexuality and faith.
There are many other questions, and I'm sure we could spend another hour on this, but we don't have another hour, and I'm very grateful, Mohsin, to you for having taken this time to talk to us about yourself and about the book and about the society in which you live and that you are trying to transform. I'm also very grateful to Akbar Ahmed and Malia Khan and Sharik Faruqi. And I'm also very grateful to the American Pakistan Foundation and Shamala Chaudhry, who I know was listening in and who has supported this by joining hands with the South Asia Center of the Atlantic Council. I want to thank everyone else who joined us. And maybe I can end with a couple of quotes that I've stolen from Mohsin's book. He talks about, he uses a quote in the beginning that says, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. I think this is from Baldwin.
Yeah, that was insane. I can't take credit for that. I wish I'd written that.
Yes, well, so do I. I wish I'd written it too. But then you end your book on a rather nice reference to something that Nelson Mandela said, that things always seem impossible until they are done. And I think in many ways, the issues that you have raised and that Akbar and Malia and Sharik and our various members of the audience have raised are the things that we think are impossible until we get them done. So thank you again. And thank you on behalf of the South Asia Center and the American Pakistan Foundation.
Thank you so much.